The Minnesota Timberwolves beat the Denver Nuggets in Game 7, 98-90 to move on to the Western Conference Finals. This was a big game. A lot of people were looking forward to it, and it was a Game 7. Who doesn't love Game 7 basketball in the NBA? The Minnesota Timberwolves overcame a 15-point deficit at halftime to take home the win, and it was a really good game that came down to the wire. On the Minnesota Timberwolves side, Anthony Edwards did struggle this game, especially early. The Denver Nuggets were throwing a lot of bodies at him, making him see double teams and having to play out of that and forcing the other players on the Minnesota Timberwolves to have to beat them, to have to make plays, to have to make shots if they wanted to win. And that is what the Minnesota Timberwolves did. The other players outside of Anthony Edwards, they stepped up. This was a total team effort by them. And early on, the Minnesota Timberwolves fell behind, and the Denver Nuggets, they were rolling offensively, particularly Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic doing a great job as they do in the first half to get that lead. But the Timberwolves stuck with it in the second half. Things started to click. The defense started getting stops on the Denver Nuggets, and that's what really turned in the second half. The Minnesota Timberwolves stuck with it, and the other players outside of Anthony Edwards really propelled the Minnesota Timberwolves to this win. Anthony Edwards struggled this game. He went 6 for 24, only had 16 points, but the other players like Jaden McDaniels, 23 points on 7 for 10 shooting, super efficient. He shot 3 for 4 from the three-point line. Karl-Anthony Towns had a great game, 23 points, 8 for 14 from the field, 12 rebounds, which was big. Naz Reid, he's always efficient, 4 for 7 from the field with 11 points. And that was the thing about the Minnesota Timberwolves that coming into the playoffs, I was really nervous about for them in terms of their half-court offense just was not up to par in a lot of their games during the regular season. So I was wondering how it would translate into the postseason, because in the postseason, the game slows down. You have to play in the half court. You got to be efficient on the offensive end. And they just were not that in some games during this series. Number one, their defense really showed up for them in the second half, which got them easy baskets, and they were able to get things going offensively. But Jaden McDaniels, Cat, and Naz Reid being able to knock down shots, especially from the perimeter, as the Nuggets really loaded up on Anthony Edwards, forcing him to play in a crowd and forcing other players to make shots and beat them. And that's exactly what they did. They showed up when they needed to. Like I mentioned, Anthony Edwards struggled, but being able to handle that double team in the second half and finding his guys and putting them in advantageous situations to be able to score baskets, I think that was big. And big shout out to Rudy Gobert. Down the stretch in the second half, in the fourth quarter, he did a really good job of knocking down his free throws, which he has definitely struggled with this series. He was 7 for 9 from the free throw line this game. Clutch free throws by him down the stretch. I believe he hit like 4 in a row in the second half, and that really helped the Minnesota Timberwolves build that lead. He hit that tough shot to beat the shot clock over Jokic. It was like a turnaround jump shot fading away to beat the shot clock, and I think that was a gut punch for the Denver Nuggets. So this was just a total team effort by the Minnesota Timberwolves. This is just another example of who they are as basketball players and as a basketball team and as coaches on that team as well. Just the grit and grind to try and continue to fight and overcome any situation that's thrown at them. So big shout out to them. I think they had a really good game, especially in the second half. The defense really showed up in the second half, and offensively down the stretch, they outplayed the Denver Nuggets as a team, because on the Denver Nuggets side, Jamal Murray and Jokic, they did their thing. They were really good on that end of the floor. Jamal Murray did have a stretch in the second half where he didn't score because the Minnesota defense really keyed in on him, and they were doubling Jamal. They were doubling Jokic, forcing the other players to have to score in order for the Nuggets to win. And that is where things fell apart for the Denver Nuggets. The Nuggets were not able to capitalize on those opportunities in terms of players like Aaron Gordon needing to score, in terms of Michael Porter Jr. needing to knock down shots, KCP, and so on and so forth. For the Denver Nuggets, Aaron Gordon only had 4 points. Michael Porter Jr. only had 7 points. KCP only had 5 points. And the bench for the Denver Nuggets, they only had 5 points total. Christian Braun was the only player off the bench that scored for the Denver Nuggets. And like I mentioned before, Jokic and Murray had big games. Jokic had 34, Jamal had 35. So that is 69 points just by them alone. But outside of that, they just didn't get much contribution in terms of scoring from the players outside of Jokic and Murray. So it was just a really great game. Came down to the fourth quarter. I think the Minnesota Timberwolves really showed the type of team they are, the grit and grind, the ability to continue to push and overcome any obstacle. The Nuggets, they just struggle offensively, and we all know that that is their calling card, their ability to play off of Jokic and Murray. They had great games, but the Nuggets are most dangerous when the other players are able to really score and contribute offensively. That's when it's really tough to beat that Denver Nuggets team. And it just did not work out that way for the Nuggets. And another thing that really hurt the Denver Nuggets was offensive rebounding, especially down the stretch of the game. There were a lot of big rebounds by Rudy Gobert. There were a lot of big rebounds by Karl-Anthony Towns and Naz Reid on putback dunks. Those are plays that really allowed the Minnesota Timberwolves to extend their lead and not allow the Denver Nuggets to cut into the lead, because there were a lot of key possessions where the Nuggets would get initial stops. They would force the Timberwolves to miss shots, but they just gave up offensive rebounds and gave up second chance opportunities, which did not help them at all, especially being down as much as they were in the fourth quarter going down the stretch. I believe it was around 8 to 10 points, and that just really hurt the Denver Nuggets and didn't allow them to get back in the game. The Timberwolves ended up pulling this game out. They outscored the Denver Nuggets in the second half, 60 to 37. Great game from the other players outside of Anthony Edwards, and Anthony Edwards, salute to him for being that guy to take on the double team and trust his teammates. And it was just a great game. Game sevens are always fun to watch. So really enjoyed it. And now I'm looking forward to seeing the Minnesota Timberwolves face the Dallas Mavericks. I think that's going to be a really fun and interesting matchup. And I think it's going to be a good conference final. So really looking forward to that.